since we're all here. Why don't we do a call to order? Well, I guess before we get into the roll call, we do have on the agenda that we intend to end the meeting by 9 o'clock. We came close last time, but not quite there. But I think it's our intention to get there tonight. So with that, Heather, can you do a roll call?
Sure. Stephen Borgsdorf.
Here from Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Thank you. Oh, yes, thank you. I do need to remind you to state where you're from or where you're at right now, not where you're from. You don't have to give us your life history, but where are you physically at right now? All right, Jennifer Cornell.
Here, Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Thank you. Alan Haber.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Sarah Hammerschmidt.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Jeffrey Henney.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Camila Lizundia.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Rita Mitchell.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Alice Ralph. You're muted.
There we go. Here from Ann Arbor, Michigan, Washtenaw County, Michigan.
Thank you. Frank Wilhelm.
Here from the west side of Ann Arbor, Ward 5.
Frank Wilhelm.
Oh,
Sorry, I just said you. Adam Zemke.
Here, but in Port Huron this evening.
Oh.
Great.
Tom Crawford.
Here from Ann Arbor.
And Erica Briggs.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Right, wonderful, full house. So with that, we move on to approval of the agenda. Are there any amendments to the agenda for this evening? Okay, hearing none, can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
I'll second.
All right. All in favor of approval of the agenda as written, say aye.
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 Any nays? All right, motion passes. Approval of the minutes from the prior meeting. They are posted on Legistar. Are there any comments on the minutes from last week, or last month rather?
Yeah, I'd like to comment that they're too sketchy. I think and somehow we do need a secretary or some note taker. For instance, when there is the protocol for the agenda, one of the items, I think that when there's something there, it isn't reflected in a motion, but it should be reflected in what is that protocol. And when there are public comments, I think the people who make the public comment, at least their names should be recorded. I don't want to make any objection to it, but I think we should improve the agenda process, the new minutes process, and it may be that we need to appoint among ourselves, perhaps as a rotating position, a secretary or a note taker to fill in some of the topics that don't actually produce a resolution that would be recorded in the formal way. But looking back at these minutes over time, I don't think we will learn enough, or somebody looking at it will learn enough. So that might be a later question on our agenda somewhere down the road as to how to improve the content of the minutes or the notation of the meeting content.
Can I ask a question related to that, please?
Yeah.
Are the recordings of the meetings archived somewhere? I mean, those are available for anyone who wants to deep dive and really get into the substance of the meeting at a later date. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, they are recorded. CTN records them, so they are playing on the government channel live right now, and then they are replayed again. And you can just access them by looking them up on CTN.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments on the minutes from last meeting? Yeah, Frank.
just one other maybe clarification. For example, when Tom gives his report as city administrator, is that a written report that could be included or referenced in the minutes? You know, a link to them. Because I agree with Alan that even a month later, maybe it's an age thing. You look back and you want kind of something more to reference to sort of bring back the conversation. I realize that, you know, the video and the tape is there, but that's pretty arduous to find things, and especially if you go over 2 hours. But anyhow, they're just kind of figuring a way to have a little more something to prompt us on what did transpire.
We don't actually have an administrator's report on each agenda. That was something that we did last time, so it's not a standing item.
Okay.
That's something we could consider doing. What we did do, you'll see on this agenda is attached the issues exploration document is what we're calling it. And that's meant to track some of that. And that's going to be a document that I continuously update based on how things evolve. So that might be helpful.
That'd be very helpful. Yeah. Good. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Alice, you have your hand up, I think. And
Yeah,
then,
I'd just like to say that the streamlined version of the minutes, I think, are the preferred by legal terms, showing mostly actions or facts related to those actions. But, and I do appreciate that CTN is recording them. I have in the past tried to use that resource. It is a little clunky, but it's all there, including the expressions on people's faces and everything like that. Well, they're not video. It's not video for this meeting, but I think it's too much to go through. Even if you had to print out all of these notes and everything, that might be a little bit of a quagmire as well. I would be in favor of keeping the minutes as they are recommended to be very brief and action oriented. We have a note taker, and we can take our own notes, and that's my opinion of how we should handle the content of the meeting for reference.
Rita?
I'll just agree with Alice for the most part. We did discuss this in one of our prior meetings, and the potential for kind of introducing some bias. And so I think as long as we can capture for sure the decisions, I think that's good. And I understand the wish to have more detailed. I can tell you that from taking some minutes recently myself and trying to my notes and transforming them into minutes, when they were more detailed, it was more difficult to write them in a way that I felt was accurate. So I'm going to vote on the bare bones. Oops.
All right. Well, it sounds like we have a little bit of difference there on opinion. If we want to appoint an official note taker, at least, I guess hearing that seems like we don't want to take any more action to do that. Do we want to have a motion on approval of the minutes?
Yeah, I heard a good discussion. I didn't hear any specific changes to the minutes of the last meeting. I would move the approval of the minutes as presented in the packet.
I'll second.
All right, wonderful. All in favor of the motion at hand? Say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. I think with that, we're on to public comment. Heather, could you help us with that? Are there any members of the public?
Yes, I can. Let's see who we've got. I don't see anybody with hands raised. Yes, I do. Okay, Robert, I'm going to allow you to talk. You should be able to talk now.
Can you hear me okay?
You can.
Thank you. This is Robert Black. I'm a member of the initiating committee, and I just wanted to let you know that you do have an interested audience here, and that your work is very important, and I'd like to applaud you for that. I just wanted to say a special kudos to the initiating committee, of which I am a member. And it's a very diverse committee and who's actually very much action oriented. You talked about tracking actions in your meeting minutes. And I'd like to just underscore the efforts of the initiating committee from the end of the task force report to the beginning of your work. They've done a lot to do working with education and outreach to the community about commons and commoning in the world. They've done a lot with gardening, currency, and there are other different committees that are all working in a very broad effort to move this forward. So I'd like to just encourage you to keep that support from the initiating committee as you move forward. And then also to keep a perspective on the whole project, such that Ann Arbor is a wonderful model for this. As we're seeing with the COVID pandemic, it's a world community. And so that Ann Arbor can be an example for others in the world of how to practice commonings to get diversity, equity, inclusion, and those kind of things really living from all constituents of the community. I just encourage you to move forward with some kind of intention and action to really make this happen. You will, of course, run into difficulties, but I'd like to applaud you for the way that you have worked together thus far and encourage you to continue including as many people as possible in this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
And I don't see any other hands raised right now, but we do have two people on the phone. So I'm going to say *9 if you want to raise your hand. And there's somebody that just raised your hand. So I'm allowing you to talk. It's the phone number that ends with 464.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you. Linda Brower. I just want to say, as you know, that City Council will be voting on the budget at their next meeting, and the draft budget right now doesn't allocate any funds at all for the center of the city. And I would encourage you, any council member can bring an amendment at the next meeting before the final budget is passed. So I would ask that you send a recommendation to City Council asking for that kind of amendment and specify a specific dollar amount that you think is reasonable to allocate for this fiscal year. I think it's really important, and I think for the eventual success of the center of the city, I think we need a modest amount to get things going this summer. Now that some pandemic restrictions are lifted, I think it would be perfectly safe and reasonable to put some outdoor furniture and spruce things up a bit and make it more inviting so people can start using it. You know, socially distanced is necessary, but I think it's really important you show some progress this summer. And without a little bit of a budget, that probably won't happen. So I'm hoping that you will do that. Also, I want to remind you, this is a charter amendment, and it's been almost 2 years now since it was put in the charter. And it doesn't seem right at all that, you know, there's nothing visible on the site yet. So I'm hoping this is your opportunity to get something going by getting a modest cash infusion as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Was there one other hand raised, Heather, or is that it?
It's not another hand raised, but there's somebody else on the phone. So I just want to remind you that if you hit *9, if you did want to comment, you can do that. Okay, and then there is another opportunity for public comment at the end.
Wonderful. All right. With that, we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the budget discussion. Now, I think this could pertain to a couple of things, depending on where folks wanted to go. I know that there were some questions that were written in to staff regarding the budget of our council. And so, you know, Heather, as you fielded some of those questions, could you fill us in on or Tom, on where we're at with the $20,000 and all of that? So I think, Heather, if you would like to, you're more than welcome to. We do have both Tom and Councilmember Briggs that have raised their hands too. So however you'd like to handle it.
I say let Tom and Councilmember Briggs go first, and then I can fill in any gaps if there are any left.
Very good.
Can you hear me, Heather? Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I do this by my phone, so it's a little different. Sorry. Councilmember Briggs, do you mind if I start out?
Go for it.
Okay. Thank you. You know, there were a number of questions about the budget. I know we talked about it last time, and I was hoping to take a couple minutes today to share with you kind of the calculation I made and what is in the budget and what is not in the budget and why. So Mrs. Brower, Linda, I can't remember her last name exactly, had called in and asked, wasn't there $20,000 in the budget, and how much of that has been spent, and what's left over, and what happens if it doesn't get spent. And there was $20,000 budgeted, $12,500 was spent, and what is unspent is, and that $12,500 is primarily for staff time. So our budgeting process is kind of complicated because most of our funds are restricted. So Heather, for example, if she's going to spend time working on this, she charges to this, and so to the extent that people are working on something affiliated with this, they can charge to the project. And Heather could correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that was the major expenditure. But she's the one that actually looked at that. What I would share is that at the end of the year, when we allocate funds at the end of the year, if they're unspent, then they, just like it's your home checkbook, it just stays in your checking account for the next year. If we're not going to do that, if we're saving for a big project, there's a different way that we would budget for it. So right now, whatever is unspent at the end of the year would go back to fund balance. Now, for me, and I don't want people to think that that I'm unsupportive or the city's not supporting this effort. Let me take a step back for a moment and explain just briefly where the budget was. As I was preparing the budget about a month ago, we were still not sure how quickly we're going to come out of this thing, the COVID, and the city's recommended budget shows that we have more expenditures than we have revenue, to the tune of about $2 million a year. And so we're already spending out of savings just to basically, do the things that are in there. And so as I looked at the different things that were in the recommended budget, I looked at the ones that had plans and approved plans or plans well developed, and funded those prior to the ones that did not have plans. The main thing, of course, we fund is a lot of the work we're already doing. In supporting the Council of the Commons, one thing I did do is add what we call an FTE, or an employee, an equivalent of an employee, which allows Heather and others to charge to support whatever the Commons needs. So for their time, this is personnel time. So there is an FTE in there that is available to support the Council of Commons, and we haven't had that before. I also checked with our broadcasting group, and I don't think they're going to charge us, but I made sure that they're able to handle the media, the normal media coverage that we would have for our board meetings. I have not put anything else in the recommended budget for any picnic tables or running plumbing lines or anything like that, because as I was saying earlier, well, let me say this. I was sharing in an email that I wrote Mr. Haber earlier. I said, Mr. Haber, I think we're looking in the same direction. We're just coming from different vantage points, and that is truly the case. As a person who's very advanced in moving the Commons forward, it's very creative, and really, I think Mr. Haber is really moving quickly and wanting to do different things. From my vantage point, as we look forward, it's not just throwing a picnic table out there, right? I'm a steward of the public resources, and as a steward of the public resources, we have to be. Once the rules of the road are set up, the creativity can come. But for example, if there's a table out there, or there's going to be congregating, who's responsible for cleaning it? What happens if there's damage? What happens if somebody gets hurt? These things actually have to be worked out for us to be comfortable in the activities. And once that framework is set up, then what you want to do there becomes very creative and within the limitations that are there. So we are looking the same direction, and it's a creative direction. I just wanted to say that from the recommended budget perspective, having a plan, having some sense of what we're going to do really helps me put something in. And the other aspect of this was, if I put money in for the commons, I'm taking it away from somebody else. And so, I had to balance where that would go. So it's a trade-off. I realize everybody comes to different conclusions on this, but that's how we got to where we are in the budget. As we talk about budget for this activity, we don't really, as I think about it, I don't really think of advisory councils as having a budget themselves. So I want to draw a distinction as you consider and think about how funding works. I want you to consider the difference between having a budget yourself, that you have a checkbook that you're writing and basically doing, and having the checkbook at the city. So when funding is established at the city, it has to go through the city's procurement process. We have, as public funds, where we just have a lot of rules and policies, and they aren't really super fast, but they are effective at ensuring that taxpayers are getting an appropriate service for their dollars. And so when we do that, you should think about the funds being held at the city, and having, if something's going to be done, the city would be a part of that process with you. We need to do this together. We really do need to do this together. And I want you all to know that the city is absolutely willing to do that, and is happy and excited about doing it. It's just we need to get some of this framework in place. So that's where my head was at when the budget was being developed. I think that addressed most of the questions that I saw. If I missed some, I'm happy to take any additional ones. Heather, did you have anything else, or Councilmember Briggs?
I can just kind of add on to what you said. So I appreciate that. I think I have completely understood kind of how the city was developing its budget, and understanding all of the different things that would come at you with so many different priorities, and the challenge of being able to craft a budget that addresses all of them. As I look, as I've sort of debated how the next coming budget should look, and think about what it should include, and how we can kind of advance our priorities, particularly I listen to my son practicing in the background, if you can hear it. Look at how we advance the priorities of this commission. Obviously, we've got the structural budget deficit that makes finding funds challenging. And I think the charge of this commission is obviously to figure out, we're gonna be thinking about this sort of short term, guided by the charter amendment, and thinking about sort of short term what we can do in this public space, as well as sort of long term. As I've been kind of coming back and thinking about the budget, I think there may be, based on previous discussions, I think there's maybe not a solid vision about what the short term work might look like on in this public space. But I actually think there's a fair amount of coalescing around the long term vision, that the goal is to advance the making sure that we move towards park and civic space on this land. And so to do that, it seems like we're going to need some money to be able to work towards public engagement, building and design work. So I know that the Conservancy has been busy fundraising over the last couple of years, and has certainly acquired a nice set of funds that I'm hoping might be able to be used as matching funds towards with city funds to be able to do this work. So I'm still trying to figure out exactly the dollar amount that I can sort of put forward a budget amendment to be able to do this work. But based on sort of discussions with Heather, and also reaching out to Jennifer Hall, who's been doing work at the division, and William in terms of the affordable housing there, I think that I'm hoping that work around sort of planning design might be around $70,000 or $80,000, kind of at the low end of low end. But those are sort of the numbers that I keep hearing over and over again. So I'm going to do my best to be able to put forward a budget amendment for $40,000 for this next budget cycle. So still working with folks to make sure that that's possible, but I think that it is based on some of the answers that I'm getting. So that's where my personal thought is, and I think that they're I'm happy to take questions around that, and also I'd love to hear sort of feedback from folks here.
Any questions, Stephen? I think you had your hand. Was that your hand up?
No, that was me just trying to operate the mute and unmute functions. So.
Any questions at all for Councilmember Briggs or Administrator Crawford? Jeff.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to Tom Crawford and to Councilmember Briggs for being so thoughtful about this, and I'm very impressed with the seriousness with which you're, attempting to do a positive initiative here for everybody, and I think your points are well taken, and I appreciate very much Councilmember Briggs, that you're willing to consider seriously putting forward an amendment. And I think we have actually quite a few ideas that are coalescing, even short term, that myself and others would be happy to share with you and others at your convenience. Obviously, the whole process with the COVID and all the rest of it has made it a little bit difficult to kind of disseminate clearly what our coalescing thinking is on the short, medium, and long term. We took seriously what Tom Crawford proposed to us last time, which is that to start thinking in those sort of that tripartite terms, and be very happy to talk about that with anybody that would like to discuss it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. I think Alice is up next.
Okay. First of all, thanks, Jeff. I just, listening to all this, I get a few things in my head that I wonder how we can turn them into less barriers and more avenues, I guess. And because what I hear is if we don't have plans, we don't get money, but we can't get plans without money. We're stuck in a kind of a conundrum here. And I'm not sure what to think about that, but that's 2 meetings I've heard that, you kind of have to have shovel ready, get a budget line item, but we can't get a shovel ready without money to fund planning. And maybe the word planning or plans means different things, but we need to understand what we're talking about. And the other thing is, Erica said something about the work at Division and William, and I'd like for all of us to be aware of what that is referring to.
If I said Division, I believe I meant Fifth and William in terms of the affordable, the old Y lot with the affordable housing there. Sorry.
Yep. And I think that basically highlights the need to have interaction with all of these things, or at least some kind of way to knit all of these things together, just like we're beginning to use sustainability and climate response as the first priority in anything that we do. Well, maybe we should start getting information from all of the organizations who are doing work, like the DDA with the street, the two-way streets. We need a lot of information from that. We need to know if we can tie in to those projects to enhance them and to enhance our work, because apparently we have no plans and we have no budget. So I'd like to know how we can move forward with recommendations as an advisory board if we don't have the information that we need.
Can I just respond to that real quickly? I mean, I think that's why I'm trying to, based on sort of the feedback I've been hearing and, hearing from members of this group as well, is that we should be working very tangibly to invest in making that plan and having real designs that the public can react to for what will actually be built on this site, that we can go through a public engagement process and come up with some different pieces. And I would hope that this group would be able to inform that process moving forward. So that's really trying to take away that barrier.
That kind of plan that you're speaking of requires money to hire a consultant to do the planning and the public engagement, but we have no money. So this is the conundrum I'm seeing. I don't hear any alternative point of view that sounds like forward moving.
Mr. Ralph, or Adam, if you don't mind if I jump in?
No, that's fine.
Mr. Ralph, I think what Councilmember Briggs is indicating is that she's pursuing a strategy to get funding to do that. So my recommended budget doesn't have it, but my budget goes to council a week from Monday. And at that meeting, council members consider it and then make amendments. That's what happens, is a bunch of amendments that night. And so she's telling you now that she is looking for funding to do just that planning that you're talking about.
Yeah, I would like to have more antecedents to pronouns, like to do that. What is that?
The planning, the planning effort that you referenced, as far as having developing some kind of plan, and you said you wanted a plan, but there's no money, and so she's trying to get the money so that we'd have a contractor that could actually lead the development and engagement of a plan with this group and the community. Does that make sense?
All of that. I appreciate all of that. I think there is some thought we have in common about who does the planning, and I think this is really based on community involvement. And so when you say to get someone to do plans for us, we don't want them to do plans for us. We want to be part of the creation of the plan.
Sure. Yeah, and actually Heather, who is professionally a planner, might want to take a second to just describe a little bit of how that process might work.
Yeah, what I would imagine happening is going to a consultant, hiring a consultant to lead us through a process that would get to the physical design of the space. At least that's what I'm imagining, because we have a general idea based on all the work that the task force did about what people want there. It's just a matter of how we configure that and what the priorities are, because there's a lot of things that people are imagining for that space. So how we physically do that and how we work with the structure that's underneath the space. And so going through that process, and it definitely being a highly involved process with the public to get to that, so that people have agreement on how to move forward with a space that really serves the community.
Does that help answer your question, Alice? A little bit?
I think we're getting somewhere, but we'll see how things move from here.
Okay. We've got a few more folks that have had their hands raised. Jennifer's up next, and then Frank, and then Rita, I believe.
I just wanted clarification or to confirm when Tom said that any money from the city budget that he was able to allocate toward this project. When Councilmember Briggs mentioned that she was also seeking additional funding, I assume that any funding that would be allocated toward this project from council sort of follows along what Tom said in terms of if we don't use it, it kind of ends up in a piggy bank. It's not a use it or lose it situation, regardless of how the allocation is awarded, for lack of a better way to phrase that.
Yes, not to overcomplicate, because I could spend all night talking to you about budget, but there are two broad ways that we budget. One is an operating budget, which means it's like what we get in a year, we spend in a year. It's our activities. The other one is a capital project type thing, where the dollars are bigger and the effort takes more than a year. Those we would. So if you're going to build something, let's say that's $1 million, then that would go in a different kind of budget. It's called a capital budget, and it lasts beyond a year. But almost all the activities in our general fund, which is where this asset lives, is in an operating type thing. So we will manage with whatever don't let the budget structure be an impediment, right? Figure out what you want to do. We'll get the budget to work that out. Now, finding the funds we'll need some help on, but we'll make the structure work for you.
We're back to figuring out what we want to do without any money to figure it out.
We'll keep going here. Frank?
I want to first thank Erica for this effort. This is an important move. I think that the symbolic nature of this, with the city stepping forward, hopefully with a budget amendment, is very, very important. I think I've been saying from the beginning being, I guess, the approval of Proposal A, that we need a strong public-private partnership. And I think this is the public part of it. The private part at the moment is a partnership between the initiating committee and the Library Green Conservancy to raise private money. And we are currently at $40,000 in commitments and actual deposits. And I'm hopeful, and I'm confident that if we can bring the public part of the equation forward in this way, that this will stimulate additional private giving. In my conversations with people in organizations, people are really looking for a signal, and I'm hopeful that this is going to be an important part of that signal that we could move forward in important ways here. So thank you very much, Erica.
Thanks, Frank. Rita? I think you're muted, Rita.
Got it, unmuted. I want to thank Erica as well. And I have to say that I think I have my nearsighted vision on in asking for some input on how we deal with this short term this summer. I absolutely want to have a plan that we can move forward on and recognize the need for money. But in the short term, the very minor things we have planned are improving the look of the site with plantings. And the question is just, how do we get beyond, how do we manage kind of the pent up demand during this short-term time phase. And so I'm trying to respect what you said, Tom, in terms of that short, medium, and long-term view of things, and asking for how do we show that there's still interest, action, and momentum of some sort on this project in this short-term time.
Thank you, Rita. I think we'll go to Alan next, and then Stephen.
Good. There are a couple of things on my mind. I think there are other sources of funds that we should at least have in our perspective. That I don't think the coming money from the government to deal with civic support and the consequence of the pandemic has really been allocated. And there's money coming in, some share of which could go into a fund for the development of the commons, however it is identified, for consultants or whatever. Also, as I understand, the Greenbelt Fund, as it was passed as a bond issue, is both for acquisition and maintenance. And it's only a city council resolution that has restricted that multi-million dollars now only to acquisition. And the city council could just as well say, in this case, some of that Greenbelt Fund could be used for the development of the commons. And in addition, that would take a city council resolution to free that money, which now isn't even considered in the budget. And part of the commons is within the framework of the Parks Department that has its own budget, and we should know, what plan or funds the parks has in terms of commons development. So those are three areas. And then we do have neighbors, particularly the First Martin Company, that has a considerable investment in the Liberty Plaza. They pay somebody to take looks at that. And in some way that output into the multiple private parts of the public-private should be seen into our picture. And I think it would be very helpful if we would get the block group together so that we could see what all the neighbors have in mind. And I think many people could participate in the getting the resources needed to develop the things so that they are well planned. And I appreciate Tom's vantage point. But we need to see who are all the players here and what everybody can contribute together as a collective effort.
Adam, may I respond to a couple of those things now, or would you prefer? A couple of things, if I could just describe, and Heather, perhaps you and I should actually have an FAQ thing we start doing so that we get these answers out there to people as we do this. On the stimulus funds or the funds from the federal government, I'm expecting to hear from about those next week, but I'll have to tell you, because of the deficit that we have and the projections that it's actually not expected to improve over the next 5 years. In fact, it might get worse. If it's in the neighborhood of what I'm thinking, which is 10 to 13 million, I've indicated to council there's a good chance that I'm going to be recommending that we keep that in the bank so that we spend it through the 5 years and try to grow out of our structural deficit. It would not be monies we'd be able to have. If it's more than that, then it becomes a conversation that I feel like that we could have with council. And that's just my thought on that. There's nothing been officially given to council, but I wanted to share that with you since you raised it. In relation to the Greenbelt funds, that was a voter approved millage, and so the restriction is on by the voters. The council, it would not be appropriate for council to change that from acquisition to maintenance. In fact, I think I would certainly run it through legal, but historically they hew pretty closely to what the language was, and it was really intended for acquisition. And then on the park side, this may not make a lot of sense to people, but I was referencing earlier about how we work with restricted funds a lot, and this parcel is actually not a city park. And if it were a city park, there are millages and there are things that can be done to support it. This is open space, and that's I mean, where you're there's a difference for us between public open space and parks. You're in what we call the pros plan. If you're a park, you're subject to PAC oversight, our Parks Acquisition, our Parks Advisory Commission, things like that. So it's there's just a distinction there that's really relevant for us for funding, and I just want to highlight that. And as far as the private parties working with the block group, what I can say since the time I've been in this role is, that is on the list to advance. There's just a limited amount of management's capacity for focus, and that one is coming, but it's not yet here. We're still working on our other issues. So, thank you.
Right. Thank you, Tom. And I think there's a lot of good commentary. I think that there's also some commentary that we're going to want to bring up and make sure we tackle. And Tom hit on some of those things, as did Alan, around different potential budget sources for funding, and certainly engagement of outside groups. I think that's another item on our agenda here. I do want to just be conscious of time because it's 7:48 right now. And we've got a few hands raised. Stephen's been waiting patiently, and then Sarah, and then Alan. So Stephen, take it away.
My remarks are just from the perspective of the Parks Advisory Commission. At least they're my remarks in terms of how I see it from that position as well. Kind of echoing and following along other sources of funding. If this were a park, this is one of the kind of the theoretical questions I've been pondering. If this were a park, if we're talking about, picnic table funding, we can make that happen. I mean, the parks budget is as stressed as any of the other budgets that we're discussing, but I would certainly advocate for that. And I anticipate that the Parks Commission would advocate for that. And we could probably convince City Council. We don't spend money. We try to convince City Council to spend money. But so far, what I've heard doesn't suggest to me that there is immediate needs in the city budget right now for this parcel beyond what I've already heard described for maybe some planning money. The other topics that we've talked about so far involve like discussions with the DDA about that surface space. I don't assume that they would think that there's a money transaction coming their way sometime this year with regard to that. If there was such a transaction, again, if this were a park, we would look at that from the perspective of like probably the Land Acquisition Committee. Is that some sort of easement or other thing that we're obtaining? Similar to kind of with these adjacent parcels, and we're talking about connectivity and other issues. The Land Acquisition Committee recommends purchases to City Council for parkland or for space adjacent to parkland and so forth for those kind of purposes. And so I didn't see some reason to be baking in that kind of money into the city budget for this year. I would certainly encourage Councilmember Briggs to pursue whatever funding is appropriate in the circumstances. But just from the view of the Parks Commission, hey, if this was a park, we could get a picnic table in there. I think we could make that happen. And if we're talking about trying to access other uses of the property from some of the other landowners or interest holders in it, then that seems like a Land Acquisition Committee topic.
Thank you for that, Stephen. Definitely appreciate the fill in around the Parks Commission perspective too. Sarah?
Thank you. Okay, so I might say something potentially unpopular. So I want to preface this by saying that I'm very supportive of this. I think there's a tremendous opportunity on this site. I think that it could be really cool if we really get, especially connections to Liberty Plaza. So I'm going to say that. So one thing that's been kind of like nagging me at the back of my mind, and maybe Mr. Crawford, you have an answer for this for me, but when Prop A was approved, there was no money tied to it. So I struggle with, I do think that the city should be showing like good faith and putting money in, but like, I struggle with like, what is that coming at the expense of if we put any money towards this that wasn't approved by the voters? I don't know if there's an opportunity. You said this wasn't a park, we can't do a millage. I don't know if there's another opportunity to put this to voters to get more of like a steady funding stream, or maybe you can assure me that like this $40,000 that Commissioner Briggs is going to pitch, there's flexibility to do that. This is just something that's been nagging me a little bit, that I don't know, like this was not approved with funding. I think we have a lot of opportunities. I would love to get this block group going. I think that we can show surrounding businesses that there's value in this. There might be opportunities to have naming rights to things, et cetera. But it just, this tension between, we have a deficit, so what is this money coming at the expense of, is something that's like been bothering me a little bit. So I don't know if that's something you can respond to, or.
Well, I'll just say Councilmember Briggs, and she's started to communicate with me some of her thoughts. But this is the hard part of budgeting, is where do we take it from?
Right.
But, I think, she's indicating a desire to find an answer to that. And, it's a week or so. I would not suggest you spend too much time on that. You have a council member working on it. Let's see where it goes. This is part of the process. It's $100 million. The general fund is a $100 million fund, and that sounds like it's easy to find $40,000 until you have to take it away from somebody. To your point, everybody needs more than they have. But I would say we should have this conversation next month, perhaps, and save some time.
Okay, thanks.
Maybe just real quickly to respond to you, Sarah. I think one of the things that we're struggling on is in terms of what would be the cost to build out a, kind of the park or the civic center, what the space is going to look like. We really don't understand what the full costs associated with that are. And so to get past have a productive conversation in our community. I think we need to do the work of doing the public engagement, planning, design, understanding what the public wants, and then we can understand, well, what does that cost and how do we fund that? And so those conversations can happen next, but at least we can have forward momentum of getting past this problem that Alice is talking about.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. This kind of assuages my concerns. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. Alan?
Yeah, just my last comment. This is both the library lane parking lot and Liberty Plaza. And so the Liberty Plaza part is part of the park system. So that is part of our picture. I just wanted to we keep both of these elements of the commons together in our mind. And that's just, I wanted to add that in.
Thank you, Alan. And I just wanted to add one thing too. I want to echo something that Frank said and just say thank you to Councilmember Briggs. I do think, when we looked at the state budget, we talked about how a budget was a reflection of your values. And I do think that the action that Councilmember Briggs is thinking about putting forward here is a reflection of some of the values that she has on this issue. And so, if there is anything that folks can do, in terms of the city council meeting or things like that, I think anything to support Councilmember Briggs in the effort would be helpful. The other thing I think, one thing that was talked about at the last meeting a lot was around the vision and creating something that was exciting. And that would help build momentum. And that's definitely something that I agree with, as well, is that you can catalyze forward movement on this by really outlining that vision and getting the community excited to share in it mutually. And I think that the planning that Councilmember Briggs is referencing, and that the funding that could be used for, really is a critical part to enacting that vision. And so I appreciate that she's thinking along those lines in terms of the funding use. So I think that'll help us get us to that long-term goal. Unless there is any discussion more on the budget item, I'd like to be able to move on to bylaws discussion. There are 3 documents that we did receive very much immediately before the last meeting. So I think we did the right thing by postponing this a little bit. I did want to ask Heather if she wanted to highlight anything new or additional on this, and then open it up for any questions. It would be nice to adopt some bylaws this evening, so we have some rules to do our business by.
No, I don't have anything new or additional to speak to. Nothing has changed since they were presented at the last meeting.
Any questions at all? I see Alan's hand raised, and Alice. I'm not sure. I glanced away who had their hand up first. Alice, why don't you go ahead?
Just briefly, by this time, I'm rather, seems like an avalanche of revisions of agendas and bylaws. And I know that I got responses that weren't clear. And I don't believe I've seen a document that actually, I think maybe I have, but I think it's buried among some other things, of the second draft rather than the first draft. There were a number of conflicts in the bylaws that still hadn't been resolved. So I wonder where we really are with this. And I saw a lot of responses that there are no rules and we will have no rules. And so all of it has to be in the bylaws, but that leaves us with a very inflexible document by which we can, we have very little chance to adapt it to our particular area, our purpose. So that's kind of a concern I have that generalizes my concerns about the whole document.
To Alice's point, what is the, can we clarify what the specified title of the revised bylaws are, the ones that incorporated responses? I think that would be helpful.
All right, sure. It is the one that is the Council of the Commons bylaws draft 4/1/21. So the other two documents, the one that says AJR, that's the one that Alice marked up. So that was her her suggestions, and that was passed along to the attorney. And then the other one was a compilation of suggestions that I received through email. And so those two documents, those last two documents were passed along to the attorney, and those were turned into the draft bylaws that's labeled 4/1/21.
Got it. Thank you.
Mhm.
Alan?
Well, I do have some changes, but actually I just like to postpone this again because I think we are functioning okay. I'd like to see the time is 3 minutes rather than 2 minutes. I'd like to see the role of the initiating committee having regular reports. I'd like to see us adding to the membership to have a tribal person part of this. A number of those questions that I had raised, but I think we're functioning okay, and maybe we could have an informal working committee. That's one of the elements there. We put forward a integrated thing with what are exactly the amendments that might be still pending, but I don't know that this is with other things on our agenda, that this is really what we need to spend our next bit of time on.
Okay, Stephen?
Earlier I had a question, but Adam, you asked the question and now I have the clarification. So now I have a proposal that the draft 4/1/21, as I understand it, that's a red line. And then if those changes were accepted, that would reflect the bylaws. I would move the approval of those bylaws as reflected in that document.
Okay, so you're making a motion to approve the red line version as Heather outlined. It's document number 21-0657.
Correct.
Okay. So we have a motion on the floor.
I would second that.
Yeah.
And second, yep. And we can have debate on that motion now. And so, Alice, you had your hand up.
Well, I guess I just wanted to second it, but I do think that we have received our red lines, and the responses to my suggested revisions were mostly adequate. I just it's sort of disappointing when you realize what the bylaws are supposed to do and supposed to not do. My understanding was bylaws are the broad picture, and that the group, whether it's a committee or a commission or whatever, develops rules that fit their purpose and activity. But it seems like the responses in general said, you ain't having no rules. You're going to obey these bylaws. And I understand too that these are, quote, standard, as the legal advice says, and that there really is not much room to wiggle from the standard.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments on the motion that Stephen put forward?
I guess I'd just like to add, this is sort of reflective of many of the other commissions that the city has. They're very similar to these with, slight differences in terms of how many members and things like that. But yes, it's relatively standard across the city organization.
I have to go back with one thing. It got kind of confusing as to how many members we have and whether we can add members or not, because the original ordinances said we could add members, but the bylaws say we cannot, because we are formed as such a group, and then if we want to add more people to the conversation, we establish committees, and those can work more flexibly. That's where I started to say, okay, we can probably work with these.
All right. Alan or Heather, did you want to have any response to that?
I think that's based on the last resolution, that is resolution 210214. That is the resolution to restate the purpose and membership of the Council of the Commons. And in that resolution, it defines the number of people in the.
Right. And
so that's defined by council.
Yeah, that's the reason I bring it up, is that was the legal opinion, at least as I understood it written, that we can, as a committee or commission, we cannot change the membership. It would have to go through council to change the membership. And so we form it as it is, as the bylaws, as the resolution said to form it. The bylaws support that, and Erica's amendment is just a third part of it, where it started with the number of people that we now have, except we are missing one. So we might have to replace that. I haven't heard whether we have another council member joining us or not. We're not really fully formed.
I haven't heard if anybody has put their name forward for that or not. But to your point earlier around committees, sort of on Transportation Commission, for example, there are subcommittees get formed and then members of public get brought into that process. So there is a way to include more voices around our table as we start moving our work forward.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Alan?
Well, again, I wish that we would postpone this, but short of that, or am I making a motion to that? I'd like to amend 4.9, add a 4.9, that the Council of the Commons may add additional voting members subject to the disapproval of the City Council, particularly a member of the Ann Arbor Area Indigenous Tribal Community and a member of the African American community. And 3 others that the Council of the Commons may determine would add special quality or competence in its functioning.
So I want to do a procedural check here. I don't actually know that we have a motion on the floor right now, and I don't know that we can make a motion to amend.
I'm not embracing it as a friendly amendment, I guess, if that's some sort of procedural thing. It seems that changes the meaning of the motion that I put forward. So let's vote mine up or down, and then we can consider amendments or other things.
Okay.
Adam, this may help in the conversation. I do believe that this group is allowed to create, I'm sorry, it's late. I'm trying to think of the name, kind of ex officio or non-voting members.
Committees. Yeah.
Not committees. They can actually, I think you can have non-voting members added for your advisory purposes. So if you have an expert on something, you could have them added on to attend your meeting, be part of the board, get the materials, but not be a voting member. I think that is I think that's permissive in council's typical bylaws, and that may help Mr. Haber on his amendment.
Yeah, I think that's where committees come in. You can have anybody on a committee and they can report out to the body, but I don't think you can make them members of the body.
Okay, so we do have a motion made by Stephen on the floor. We should take a vote.
That's not amendable.
Sorry?
That cannot be amended.
I think we have to do something about this motion before we can amend the document, because Stephen's made a, prior to your comment, Alan, Stephen made a motion to approve the document. And so the debate is limited to that motion right now.
Adam, if I may, this is obviously the prerogative, your prerogative, but under the rules that the council works on, once a resolution is on the floor, proposals on the floor, you can have a series of amendments, each voted up or down prior to the then amended version being concluded.
Okay.
All right.
Then that's
I'm
fine.
game.
As long as we're procedurally correct, then we're good. Councilmember Briggs?
Yeah, I think my only concern with Alan's proposed amendment is just that I don't think that it's permissible. I mean, the members are set by council as a body, council body, and so the numbers and that this voting membership has been defined by council, and so simply adding it to the bylaws isn't going to. I mean, I'm happy to take the advice of the staff on this one, but I don't believe that can override the views of the council resolution, and so certainly that could be something that this group as a whole could go back and make a recommendation to council for at some point to change this. But I think for right now we're at this voting membership.
That is my understanding as well,
Yeah,
based
so
on
what
the
would
feedback from the attorney.
Yeah, so what would happen procedurally is if you passed it with a different level of membership, for it to then come to council, it would have to come from council for consideration, and the legal would not likely let that pass, or it would come with the recommendation that is inconsistent with the guidance provided by council.
Does that do anything to the rest of the bylaws?
My recollection is that the bylaws, once you're adopted here, have to go to council for approval. And so none of them will be, none of it is valid until it is approved in total.
Okay. So, just to make sure that I'm clear on this, if we accept Mr. Haber's amendment and then the document would go to, and we pass Stephen's motion, then the document would go to council or go to legal and say it's not in alignment with the resolution passed by council. And they can, if they want, make a motion to change the resolution that they passed to reflect the bylaws, in which case, and then approve the bylaws if they wanted to. Or if we pass the bylaws that are in alignment with the resolution for this council as passed by city council, then city council just has to accept the bylaws. Is that correct?
That is what I expect, yes.
Okay. Okay.
One of the legal comments that I received was that adoption is approval, or approval is adoption. It's as far as we're concerned, we've adopted them once we vote yes. But they do have to go to council for final.
Right. I think that the distinction is definitely that council will have to take another action to approve not only the bylaws that we've passed, but also approve changing their resolution.
Yeah, or disapprove, or not doing so.
Yes, correct. Frank?
I hope this is an appropriate comment. I'm looking at the clock. There are a couple of more really important agenda items. I don't know how we can expedite this. At one point, Alan seemed to think from his perspective, we didn't have to act on this now. But I also see the importance of moving the bylaws forward. But I'm concerned that all of a sudden it's going to be June here.
Yeah. Can the vote be called?
Yep, definitely can, since you called it.
Okay.
So I guess we have to have a second for Stevens. We have a second. That's right. Councilmember Briggs did second. I apologize. And the vote has been called. So why don't we take a vote in that particular case? Heather, could you do? We probably should make sure that everybody raises their hand.
Are we voting on Alan's amendment first,
No.
or are we?
So technically, I think if somebody wanted to
comment.
What's that? Sorry, Stephen.
It is
I
not.
was just saying, per Tom's comment,
Yep.
if we wanted to vote up or down to have Alan's amendment join in. Just to be clear, I'm not against the spirit behind Alan's amendment. I just don't think it's within our purview to change the composition of the council for reasons already described.
No, we're calling
I
the
think
vote.
once we get the bylaws behind us, we'll be
Right.
able to then move forward with the inclusive conversation that we're envisioning.
Yeah.
But so I think the motion before us is Alan's amendment, but I'm not.
Oh, I thought it was yours. 'Cause
No,
yours
I-
All
comes-
right, well,
To clarify, I do think the motion on the floor is Stephen's motion. Per
I'd
what
like
Mr.
to move
Crawford.
the table. Can I
per
move
what
the table? I'd like
Wait.
to move the table. to
Well,
the-
we've already got a motion on the floor, Alan. Now, I do want to ask, I think, Mr. Crawford, given this rule that you outlined, does Mr. Haber need a second for his amendment to Stephen's motion?
He should have a second for the amendment, yes, for you to consider it.
Okay. Does somebody want to make a second to Mr. Haber's amendment?
I'll second it.
Okay. Okay, so in that case, there is a motion on the floor. The question has been called to the bylaws that are outlined in item number 21-0657. But with the amendment, Alan, could you read your amendment just so we have an accurate reflection of this?
Actually, I don't approve of this process. I think we should table it till the next meeting. Calling the question should not terminate debate. There are other amendments that are appropriate that I said at the outset. I move to table this to the next meeting. And that is parliamentary procedure, I do believe.
So, Alan, the issue is we do have a motion on the floor, so we have to take a vote on this procedurally. Now, you have a second on your amendment. I would like to clarify that amendment so that we have an understanding by all members as to what they're voting on.
Alternatively, he could withdraw it.
We only have those two options, I think, Alan.
Yeah,
Procedurally.
I withdraw it, but I disapprove of the process.
Okay, so you withdraw the amendment. So we are back to the original motion, 21-0657, as written in the agenda. And we should do a vote of hands. If you are in favor, please raise your hand. Any opposed, we will get to that after we do the hands raised. So all in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed, raise your hand. Okay, motion passes. All right,
Process. Sorry, Adam.
okay.
Other amendments of this are no longer in order. We just go on to the next order of business.
That's the way I understand it, yes.
Yeah. Well,
we could approve the bylaws per the amendment of bylaws provisions stated in the bylaws, if it comes to that.
You can do future amendments with an approved set of bylaws. There's a process.
Yeah, it's not like it's totally over, Ellen. It's just that we
Right.
we have approved a set of bylaws to recommend to council now. Okay. With that, we will go on to member news and updates. I guess I'll start off. I just have a question. At the last meeting, we talked about some of the planting going forward. I was kind of curious if I recall correctly, Rita and Tom were going to have a conversation about that. Whatever happened?
Well, I'll speak. We have initiated some work in the large garden bed near the elevators. We cleared some weeds from the space and it is nearly ready for planting. And I want to thank members of the DDA and forestry and Heather for helping get set up to allow us some wood chips to be used for mulch that will be delivered tomorrow. So we are also in process of planning for planting. And so you won't see a lot of color just yet, but watch this space. We're still sort of in the preparation phase. And I can say that, again, this is an issue where it's sort of like, we're planning, we don't exactly have funding ready, but we will move forward in some way or another.
Thank you. That's good to hear. Jeff.
Yeah, so at the initiating committee, we have been working diligently to respond to Tom Crawford's, as I said earlier, suggestion that we start looking at short, medium, and long-term thinking and planning. Now, obviously, we are going to be involving obviously lots of other people and perhaps a consultant. But I've always found in my experience as a project manager and administrator that over the years that it's useful to have a straw man, as we call it, or some kind of a starting point, a model, or some ideas that are carefully articulated that people can tear apart or throw away, or it stimulates thought and helps people to consolidate their thinking. So we're thinking of putting something together as a starting point that people can work with that is much more detailed and much more responsive to what Tom was looking for than perhaps has been out there. In particular, there's one area which we found might be of great interest, and that is there is sort of a coalescing of important items of concern to the city right now. One of them, of course, is net zero, the whole big initiative there. The other one is affordable housing, which is extremely important. And the third one, of course, is the whole idea of using the space in a way that is conducive to creating a kind of heart of the city, giving people a reason to interact with each other more and be more engaged in understanding each other. And so one of the items that we've been looking at is the possibility of using some of the space temporarily, and it maybe goes to a more permanent idea of showing how there are new kinds of affordable housing, new kinds of construction methods, new kinds of structures that you can work with that are a lot cheaper and a lot more robust and a lot more energy efficient. Combination of new materials, showing some examples of structures and how a real housing unit would look like with alternative energy and some new ideas about how it might be self-sustaining in various ways. So we're trying to put up together a little model of that, and we've talked to a number of organizations and companies that are very excited about that kind of idea. And so that's just one example of sort of things we're working on that would be more short-term. But as I say, we want to put out a straw man, and that's what we've been working on. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. That's a great update. Any other updates from members? Alan?
Yeah, well, we did a couple of things. The initiating committee took an initiative and planted a holiday tree opposite the elevator, and it prospered there for Christmas, Hanukkah, Tree of Life, the solstice, and then it outgrew its space, and it has been nicely moved by city forestry to the Leslie Golf Course by T17. So the tree is in good health, and that red planter is now available for planting. And we did a Earth Day gathering from Thursday, April 22 through Sunday the 25. And in conjunction with that, put together a slideshow on the Commons that became part of the 820 several-hour program on the Restoring the Earth for Earth Day. We had a number of very interesting discussions on economic development and on energy, solar energy and wind energy, that we had a rig come that demonstrated a lot of interesting stuff. It was a nice time, and we put up a decadome, and you've seen pictures of it, and are seeking to have that as a regular information idea pod, ranger station for the park rangers, and so a base for information around what's happening with the commons, and are trying to figure out how with the DDA and other interested parties that could be a regular feature on the lot.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you for having Heather send over some photographs too of that event. Frank?
Again, I guess I'm a clock watcher, but I'm anticipating we may not get into the final item on the agenda that I assume Tom and Heather helped frame some issues going forward, and how to move things, pieces of the planning effort forward. I don't know if there's a way to authorize our council leadership to be able to work on those, assuming we can't wrestle all this to the ground tonight, in between meetings. There's been discussion about forming some working groups or subcommittees to focus on specific challenges, security and safety at Liberty Plaza and on the library lot, and other important issues. I'm just wondering if there's a way to create a mechanism to have progress go forward on forming some of these subcommittees, which would allow other people, other expertise in the community to begin to weigh in on some of these important issues that will be key planning elements as we go forward. And separate from that is the idea that I'll just surface again without discussion of the Council of the Commons itself having one or a series of working sessions to begin coalescing around a vision and a plan. And I know we're going to, hopefully with funding from private and public sources, have real revenues to put into that facilitation. But I don't know if there's some things between now and the June meeting we should be doing to help that whole process along. Thank you.
Just a question for Heather. What is the process in terms of if we were to bring up, I was hoping as well to have a conversation around subcommittees. What is the process by which those are actually formed logistically?
I don't know specifically, to be honest. I think you can just form them. That's kind of what the task force did, the Center of the City Task Force did. So I think, if you want to identify the groups and identify what the purpose is of the groups too. One thing to keep in mind is the function of this body is meant to be advisory to the City Council. And so I think, I would just ask you to think about like the function of these subcommittees and what role that they play in developing recommendations that ultimately go to council.
Okay.
Maybe Tom has more insight on.
I think your answer is spot on, and it would be by resolution by this board. You can just create subcommittees, and it's recommended that, as Heather said, that you have a purpose. And there's a difference between a task force and a subcommittee, like, as far as their life or expected life, and membership and purpose is really what you need.
And leadership.
Okay. Stephen, you've got your hand up, and then Jennifer.
Just a quick member update between the last meeting and this meeting. Took a walk through the site together with Frank and Rita. We just kind of walked through and talked and just thought about ideas and things, and it was a very valuable experience. So I encourage, as we talked about last time, all of the council members to get out there early and often and just think about the space and how best we can activate it.
Just in that vein, before we get to Jennifer here, is there an interest in all getting together in a socially distant fashion at the site sometime before the next meeting of this body? Raise your hands.
Yeah.
So we will have to notice that.
Yeah.
that meeting because we can't violate the Open Meetings Act, and make it an opportunity for the public to join if they wanted to. So there's like logistical things that we would need to work out that might not, we'll have to see if we can fit it within the timing before next meeting, but we could eventually do it.
That reminds me, as a new committee, we should probably have the OMA a briefing for the full group, just so everybody understands how the city views OMA, Open Meetings Act, and the obligations, responsibilities that you have. We do have a program that I think we can provide to the group.
Okay.
I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think there may be other things related to the status of the pandemic. Not only would we have to be socially distanced, but we would, as a city-sponsored group, we might have to make sure that we are presenting our purpose and our activities in a way that's coherent with current policy about COVID restrictions and mask wearing and stuff like that. Frankly, I'm pretty conservative about that. I'm still wearing a mask a lot, almost always, except in my mother's house.
And what I would worry about in relation to the Open Meetings Act, so even if we noticed the group is going to be out there at a day or a time, if you're kind of roaming around the space, it makes it a little bit difficult to communicate to the public with certainty where you'll be so they can join. But maybe not, I don't know. We'll just have to think through that. It's not that big of a space. I suppose people would just see where you're at.
It seems like
Have we ever had information about, like, there is a sign on the First Martin property that basically says, "Don't go here unless you have permission," and it's the way you get from Liberty Plaza to the rest of the site and back. I mean, you can't get there unless you go around the block to do it if you're going to avoid their property. But it says get permission first, but I don't think anybody ever does, and I wonder what what the owners feel about changing that sign, or are we trespassing if we walk through there? That's something that I think it's a beginning of the complications that we have to resolve as we move forward, and I wouldn't want to exacerbate them before we have an idea of where we're going with that.
I have some history on that at the appropriate time to share.
Yeah, so I think that gets into another item here in a bit, and the issues and exploration. I do want to be very conscious. Jennifer has been very patient. Jennifer, hopefully we can wrap up the news and updates with yours.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to, I think, offer a suggestion in terms of, there's been a lot of chatter about having subcommittees or working groups that support this group here, and maybe for our next meeting, I feel like I'm jumping the gun in terms of next meeting agenda items, but maybe we could come forward, or I don't know, in terms of Open Meeting Act or whatever, if we're allowed to have a Google Doc or something where we just put forward what do we think these committees might be. So for instance, fundraising, pulling together a block party for, the neighbors for the commons area. I think that if we started to think about that now and maybe came forward with some ideas, we would have a little bit of productivity around that discussion in the next meeting. So that was it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to support Jennifer's idea. In part, my reading in trying to revise the bylaws, it's that committees are usually sort of time limited. They're not standing committees. They're project committees. So that allows you to bring in specified, people who are specifically addressing one question rather than being fundraising, which is a big, long-standing question. So I just want to mention that as the original intention of having committees is to be a little more flexible and focused.
So I think we've got a few items that seems like we're thinking about for the next agenda, which is great. Do we want to get into the initiating committee role line item? Heather, did you want to talk about this a little bit?
Sorry, I was muted. I'll just turn it over to Tom. I think he wanted.
Well, yeah, Heather and I have been thinking about this, and to be honest, it's been kind of confusing about who's making decisions for what, right? And if are they advisory or are they, directive? The city itself is typically interfaces with councils, boards, and commissions by with their actions, right, coming through. And then, maybe just the chair working with the staff liaison, or any of the board members could say something to the liaison. This is kind of one of those weird ones, right? I mean, it has this resolution that was created that says initiating committee should get things going and accelerate it. That to me, wasn't super clear. I had interpreted that to get until the Council of the Commons got going. The initiating committee was like it. Now that we have it, I'm really kind of confused because Mr. Haber, and the initiating committee, they have, he's got a lot of passion around this and has continued to push it, which is great. But I'm just kind of confused on where the decisions are made. So I'm going to say that from the city perspective, one of the most productive things that we could do is to identify and maybe I'm going to say recommend a resolution to council on how you'd like to have decisions made and how you want guidance provided to staff. It's just confusing to me.
Concur. That was not a motion, but I second that.
I think there's also something else I'd like to bring up that is involved in this too. I definitely think clarity around this, but I also think there's also some points that have been brought up by both Alan and then I think Frank and Rita as well, around the Library Green Conservancy. And I would like to establish some type of process by which we have some engagement with external groups. I do think the clarity is going to be really important. As I understand the intent and certainly the resolution around creating this council, this is the advisory body that the city is looking to provide for recommendations around this site. And correct me if I'm wrong on that at all, Tom or Heather, but I do think that given the passion that we have heard, and we heard from Jeff today about the initiating committee too, it seems like it would be prudent to make sure that we're having those connections and we have a process by integrating them into this work, into this council to some degree, if it's a report out or whatever.
Well, what I find challenging is so I think it's really exciting. The commenting, philosophy is really interesting and can be very creative. And I want, I assume you all want to have space for that. And yet I sit in a world with structure that requires, kind of accountability and direction that's kind of clear. And the initiating committee, as I understand it, and Alan, correct me if I'm mistaken, I don't even know who's on it, right? There's not an official membership. It's maybe an email list. It's not a nonprofit or an entity of itself, which makes it challenging for me to understand that. And then the Library Green Conservancy, I get that one, right? I don't know how it's going to fit in all the pieces, but it's a thing. So I don't know where I'm going with that, but I'm just going to say that's where the source of my confusion is.
Understood. We've got a few people on deck here. Camilla, you're up first.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, so my question was kind of covered by Tom, but I'll ask it. I'd love to know who are the members of the initiating committee, because I agree it's extremely nebulous. And secondly, I just want some clarification. Is it true that Alan and Jeff are the official initiating committee representatives of the Council of the Commons?
Yeah, yes, to the last part.
Okay. did we get an answer for you sufficiently on I think you had a second question, Camilla, and I want to be respectful of that.
Yes, yes. Can someone please answer who are the members of the initiating committee?
Alan or Jeff, feel free if you're as the designees.
Yeah, we provided a document. I made a brief presentation, you'll recall, the first meeting that we had, and then that was submitted, the PowerPoint, and then we sent a supplemental, and you can find both of these on the Council of the Commons website. And in the supplemental, you will see the names and a brief description of each member of the initiating committee as currently constituted. The objective is to expand that. But essentially, we see, at least from my perspective, the initiating committee really tried to kind of keep the flame alive after the task force ended, and to be the transition point to a much larger involvement of the community, and to stimulate that, and to, in some ways, kind of execute on what the community would like, and also the Council of the Commons. And so we've kind of tried to represent the interests of the community and to encourage and stimulate the community. We're a very diverse group. We want to be even more diverse. We've put our own resources behind this. We've worked very hard to make things happen against great odds of, the pandemic and other things. And I think, it's all very well to say, well, let's have an advisory committee and the council. But if you want the community engagement, you got to have some group of people that fires up that community engagement and channels it. And that's essentially what we see our role as being, and being able to execute on some of the things that this council would recommend to the council, the city council. You have to have, in a democracy, in a community, there needs to be some kind of organizing force. And, none of us are getting paid to do this. We love what we're doing. We're trying to make this happen. We're trying to, implement as best we can what the voters voted for. And, we don't have all the answers. It's great the Council of the Commons is here. And, we're very cognizant of our need to respect everybody's point of view, but that's really how I see it. Alan may have a different view, and I would request that maybe he could follow up from what I just said.
Well, I'd be glad to. I got my hand up. The Commons is not the traditional city government. So I can appreciate that Tom finds himself in a confused, unclear, or new situation. And all over the world, communities are finding ways that various local groups get together to do things that are needed in partnership with the government, in partnership with corporations, but as a third force in the development of community creativity and initiative. And that's what we began with as the Commons. And the view was that out of community assemblies and working groups and the garden group and the children's group and all those things, there would come together groups of people from the community who would coalesce as the working council of the Commons. When the resolution for the accelerating the development after things had stayed inactive for quite a while, the last whereas of that resolution added the Council of the Commons, that the initiating committee was in the process of seeing how do we bring all these factors of the community together. The city council decided that we're going to appoint some people who are sort of supervising this or advising the city council, as though the city council is responsible for creating this new endeavor in the center of the city. And the Commons view is that the new endeavor in the center of the city will be created by the people who create it, who actually do it. And the supervision or the advisory to the city council is there, that the city council knows what's going on, but the initiative is coming from below. So there is a mix from that which is directed from above and that which is coming from below. And somewhere in the middle, there is a mix. And that is a new thing that is being done. And it is not fleshed out, but in the council of in the initiating committee website, we have a model of what is the various elements that are coming together to create the Council of the Commons. And in the initial initiating committee accelerating development resolution, that was the sense that we are helping form the Council of the Commons. It was not pre-formed, and that the supplement resolution that added another person seems to have preempted or ignored that fact that the Council of the Commons is something that is developing in process, not fixed in membership, and coming out of the activities that are actually going on. And many of those activities haven't started, because as long as the cars are there, there's no way that that's going to be a place where kids are playing or parents are bringing their families or so on. And so it is an unclarified situation because we are still creating it. Call it co-creation, co-production, cooperation, collaboration. There are many factors working together between advisors, between what we learn from other parts of the world that are doing commoning, and between what the city council sees as important and what you all who are now brought into this process from your own creativity. See, how do we really make this beautiful and something to fly, and how do we put it into a timeline looking till 2024 and the bicentennial of Ann Arbor, and between the operating funds and the future capital development. These are all things that are kind of out there that we are to create.
All right. Well, thank you, Jeff and Alan. Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, to kind of get back to your question, Tom, in terms of how I see this, I can understand kind of the confusion from the city side, because there's been a variety of different iterations of resolutions. But I think the final one sort of clarifies that in terms of who the body that's advising council on what happens around this public space is this body, this membership here. And that doesn't mean that other folks will not have an interest in the community, but this is the body that is advising council on that respect, to make sure that, you know, some of those key voices that have been engaged in the process from the beginning, beyond my cat apparently, is that you know, there's different seats on this commission. We've got 2 members of the initiating committee, 2 members from the Library Green Conservancy, and so from at least my perspective, those voices are always at this table and helping to inform. And I'm not sure that we would necessarily need additional time on the agenda to make sure that we hear from those bodies, because they're integrated into this group already, in terms of making sure that those voices are heard. I would equate this, my background is, not to ramble on too long, but my background, obviously before coming to council, part of it was my transportation advocacy. At one point in time, the city developed a transportation commission. Now that transportation commission has representatives from a variety of different organizations, and those organizations help to provide feedback on the transportation commission. There are members from the advocacy community on the transportation commission. The Washtenaw Bicycle and Walking Coalition has a few members, and even a board member from that group, that help to provide that voice. But when the Transportation Commission provides advice to City Council, it's the advice of the Transportation Commission. It's not the advice of AATA or WBWC or any of those other organizations. And so I think as this body moves forward, you know, we need to realize we're bringing a lot of different voices and helping to move this forward. And that doesn't mean that all this other advocacy work that's happening in the community that's so vitally important to move this project forward, is it going to continue to happen and to continue to help activate and energize and fundraise and do programming and all the other great things that we need to have happen. But I think to keep this group focused a little bit, it's important to think about, be very clear about what our scope and purpose is around this table, so that we are moving forward on sort of the objectives that we just adopted in the bylaws, which were obviously relatively broad. But I think for me, I look towards the charter amendment as that fundamental guide.
So Tom, hearing Councilmember Briggs' explanation, I feel like that's reflective of what I was thinking as well, that this really is the advisory body. This is the one that city council and city staff look to around the advice. It certainly could be that we have a time, obviously, for any membership to come and discuss. And we certainly can invite in other groups if there were like a block partners group too. Is there further clarification needed from you, from your perspective on this?
You know, listen to what everybody has said. I guess I've been formulating maybe a structure in my own mind that the way that it's described. And what makes this challenging for me is there's an operating element to this committee, like a real world that's not like it's decision making, right? That is not going to be conducive to a monthly meeting, and yet there's an oversight role or a guiding role as well, which is more structural. So I wonder if the Council of the Commons, this body, is kind of the more oversight board, which is advisory, gets its guidance from council and provides recommendations. But then on if I understand the initiating committee and the Library Green Conservancy efforts, if they're looking to have activities occur, if this body could decide what the rules of the road are around that, perhaps that maybe that body is the one that is the gateway for residents to go through in order to have activities. So I could see, for example, the initiating committee or this body saying, well, we have rules of the road. Let's say for parks, for example, Liberty Plaza, you can't do anything in Liberty Plaza. There are rules there. There are park rules. Those rules, because we're in Arbor, are pretty expressive. They're pretty progressive. But you do have First Amendment rights, but then there are some rules. So let's say that got adopted for this area. This body could look at those rules and say, this is how we want it run. Council buys off on that. Maybe the initiating committee then is the source that enforces that. A group wants to do something, they go through initiating committee. The initiating committee's got to work with any logistics, with the DDA or with anybody. They make sure rules are in place. It's just an idea. I'm trying to figure out how to bring to life what the initiating committee seems to have the most passion about, which is working with the people to do things, and yet respect the fact that this commission, this council, really has the authority to say on a broad way what that is.
Okay, that's an interesting idea for sure. We've got a few folks, Sarah, then Alice, then Frank.
So in listening to all this, because I will admit I'm a little bit confused about the different the initiating committee, the Library Green Conservancy. I'm like equating this to my experience on Planning Commission, where like we don't, we are also a recommending body for most things to City Council. And I guess, this $40,000 recommendation, like, are we the right body then to be going and hiring a consultant? Should we be working? And I'm not really, this isn't really a question. This is just like thoughts. Like, should we be working with the initiating committee, sort of like as a partner that's doing these things, like in collaboration? Like I heard Jeff saying earlier that they're already working on short-term plans. Like, I want to make sure that whatever we're doing is not in silos. And I know it really isn't, because Jeff and Alan are here with us, but I don't want us to be going off and hiring a consultant and then they're already working on plans with the initiating committee. I just wonder, like, if our role is just as a recommending body, maybe we can designate funds, but like we don't necessarily do the work. I don't know, Mr. Crawford, if that's sort of, I was following what you were saying, and I think I generally agree with it.
Well, as in regards to a consultant, I would imagine the city would engage the consultant, right? The direction's done, and then
Yes.
the city's in the business of engaging people in decisions, and so this body would be, maybe helping select who is the consultant, participating in having members participate in the administration of it as it goes along, at all the meetings, for example. That's really kind of flexible and up to you guys, but it would be run by the city, and that's what some of the staff monies that I put in the budget would help cover.
Okay, this is helping me clarify, I think, our role. And I think it would be good to maybe try to clarify for everybody sort of writ large, like what these different groups are sort of doing. And I don't know that we would come to a consensus about that tonight. Like, I'm thinking like, is it this group's purview to recommend to the Parks Commission that they look at allocating funding for Liberty Plaza? I don't know if that's something the Parks Commission has purview over, but like, can we recommend those types of things to, like, is that the type of like a recommending thing that you're thinking that we would do? I'm seeing a nod from Erica.
Well, I think it would go up. I mean, this group's role is to make recommendations to city administrator and city council. So that would be the channels that any recommendations would go through.
And then they would go back down to.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I think that's how that would work. And I think you're on the right track. For me, it's been this confusion about how the parties fit together. So how do the initiating committee, how does the library, Green City, or Conservancy, how do those two even fit together, much less all three of us, fitting together. So I think we do need to carry on this conversation. And as far as engagement is concerned, I do want to say a note about that, because that is something that is part of my role at the city, is to engage the community. And I do want to emphasize that it is really important, I believe, that we follow city standards with that, because we have standards about notification, and we have channels of outreach, and then of course recording what has been said, that feedback. So I don't want that to get lost in any of this. I want us to uphold those standards as much as possible when we do. So when I envision us creating that physical design plan, which is what I think we're headed next, that would go through that process where things are really transparent and recorded in a certain way.
And having the consultant to lead that work, the initiating committee could obviously go to them with their ideas to be integrated in, along with the other regular community outreach process.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, Alice, I think you're up next. You're muted.
Sorry. There've been a lot of interesting threads that I'm trying to keep track of, but I think we might do well to go back to Camilla's question about who's who and what are the roles. The main distinction I see is between advocacy and advisory. We cannot, as a body, advocate. Our job is to advise. And the initiating committee, on their own, apart from us, is advocacy. And they have latitude. Oh, my battery's going down. They have latitude. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'll go plug in. This is going to be interesting. They have latitude that the advisory committee does not, as Tom Crawford pointed out with the Open Meetings Act and so forth. However, I think that also brings up the important point that any member of this body needs to be we're all passionate. We all want things to happen, but we have to be very clear when we speak in public, as we begin to make it clear to everyone, even members of this body, for whom we are speaking or from what platform we are speaking, so that when we say, I'm Alice Ralph, I'm with the advisory committee, they know that's where I'm coming from. But I also have to say, sometimes, especially when advocating, I am speaking as an individual and not on behalf of an organization. So I've heard people say this a lot when they speak to city council, but I think we should practice that a little bit more carefully than I think has been done so far.
Thank you, Alice. Frank?
Tom, I think it was very helpful how you framed that, because I think it led to some good conversation here. I'm looking at the clock again. I don't know. We have another public comment period here before we wrap up, and there's that item 10. I'm just looking for a way to bridge ourselves to the next meeting. Is there some way? I guess this is directed at Adam and Alice. Is there some way we can facilitate thinking about the formation at the next meeting, I guess, of some working groups and how that might play out? Is this a moment for some kind of bridging resolution to get us started on thinking and planning around some of the issues articulated in item 10, which we're probably not going to get to unless we're going to go over time, and I'm not opposed to that. I'm just trying to think of how do we productively transition ourselves on working groups and subcommittees to the next meeting.
Well, I think we could we table an item that is on the agenda until the next meeting? If we wanted to.
Yes, of course.
Well, you haven't taken an action on it, so you really can just discuss it at this meeting, and you have the ability to put it on for the next meeting. It doesn't, if there's no action, no motion on the table, it doesn't have to really be tabled.
So if it's the will of the group, we can certainly skip to sort of next agenda items. I know at the last meeting it was expressed that folks would like to make sure that we have a discussion around where we're going to go. And that certainly is reflected in the development of agendas. So if we'd like to move forward onto that discussion item, I think that that would be totally fine. Is that the desire of where folks would like to spend the next little bit here before we do get into public comment and wrap up? Just a nod of heads. Okay. Okay, that sounds good. So I guess with that, we've had a discussion around the role of the initiating committee. It seems like we've gotten some clarification. I guess unless there is any further discussion on that item, why don't we move on to development of the next agenda? So I took some notes today based on conversation, and certainly there's some things that folks would like to do in the interim for the next agenda. I would just like to, before we get into suggestions around the next month's agenda, I would just like to say if there's a way that we can really start to take the steps that we talked about last time, building a short, an intermediate, and really that large vision, I think that will really help us. It will help us gather our thoughts, and it will help us with the community move forward. So with that, in terms of next month's agenda, where do we want to go? And then certainly we can do things in the interim as well as time allows, especially if it's a public thing. There might be some constraints as Heather outlined.
Erica's had her hand up. She might have something she wants to say about that.
Oh, yes. Sorry, Erica. Go ahead.
That's okay. Just with regards to the next agenda items, I guess I heard a lot of discussion today about interest in subcommittees and working committees. And I guess for my part, I would hope that before we rush to develop those, that I think that there may be, I would definitely want to have some of those discussions you just suggested around kind of short-term, mid-term, long-term visioning that we have as a group, because I think that I think there's a lot of different perspectives in the community about what those might look like, and I just want to make sure that before we sort of move forward, that we're all in agreement, or we have as a body determine what direction we should go in terms of focusing the energy of this committee and making progress on items this next year. So, I've heard in earlier meetings we should focus on Liberty Square Plaza first. I've heard we should focus on activating the parking lot space first. And so I think we need to come to a little bit more clarity around some of that, because I think there's a lot of ripple effects from those decisions. I'm also hoping by next time that we have, money in the budget that is moving towards long-term, moving towards planning and design. And so I think there's a really active role for this group in that. And so I think we need to discuss that. Trying to think. That's it for now.
So Councilmember Briggs, if I could sum up maybe an item for the next agenda based on what you just said, maybe it's a proposal that we all come with some ideas that we feel would fall in each of those three bucketed areas. What our visions are individually for the short-term use of the space, the intermediate, and then how we transition to a long-term vision. Is that an accurate reflection? Okay, can definitely add that on. Are there other items that folks would like to have on the agenda? Certainly, subcommittee development we can put on the agenda as an item.
Thank
you. Jeff.
Just to clarify, so I would think it would be helpful if we all sent through Heather to each other, our perspective on these three items in advance of that meeting, so that people have had a chance to digest them, and then we could have a fruitful conversation. The straw man concept, everybody could put up a straw man or what have you.
I think that gets into deliberation though. So I would be able to send that out, which is a violation of the Open Meetings Act to kind of deliberate not in front of the public. So I could send that, I could compile it and then attach it to the agenda beforehand. So you'd maybe not get it necessarily in real time when people are sending it out, but once I get, we could maybe set a deadline when people can get it to me, and I can compile that and attach it to the agenda. So the public's getting it at the same time you are.
Sure, but I just want to make sure there's enough time for people to digest everybody's ideas so that we can have a really fruitful and focused discussion, because otherwise we might be, run out of time and people are not prepared. So if we could do like a week before, or, people will get something that they can have time to absorb. Is that fair?
Yeah, and Jeff, I think that's actually quite reasonable. I think we can shoot for at least a week before. And Heather, to her point, we can. That's when we were trying to post the agendas, anyways. And so, to Heather's OMA point, that would certainly keep us in compliance.
Right.
If we just shoot to get the agenda out early, heck, we might be able to get it out earlier than that. And attach all of those documents. That way the public has them at the same time that we do. So I think that's reasonable.
So our next meeting is June 3rd. So that means that people need to get their comments in by the week of May 24th at the latest. When you tell me, Heather, what's the most reasonable deadline? If they're into you by May 21st.
Yeah, I mean, I would say let's shoot a little bit earlier so we can get the agenda out, and so that you all will have time to look all of this over. So let's say the 21st, if everybody's okay with that. That gives you a couple of weeks to put thoughts together.
So Friday, May 21st.
May 21st, yeah.
So short, middle, and long-term visions or goals for the space.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool.
And I would also add, please do go back if you haven't already and look at everything, all the comments that were received during the task force effort. We don't want to really start from scratch. We did get a lot of feedback during that process. So please go back and look at those documents if you haven't had a chance to.
Definitely.
Heather,
Sarah, you put your hand
can
up.
you indicate where those are accessible? All those amazing questionnaires that were put in. I've seen them in your office, but are they all? Is that all scanned and on an internet site?
Yeah, it's all compiled. Yeah, as part of the task force report and the appendices. So, but I can send a link out again to that.
Thank you. Thank you.
I actually think that was in our agenda packet from last time too, the task force report, if I recall correctly. Sarah?
Thanks. First, Alice, I think dropped off because she's now in the, for some reason, have the attendees panel up.
Oh, no. Oh,
thank you for catching that.
Thank you.
Sure. So I don't know if my brain quite works right yet with this in like a short, medium, and long term. And I really like the issues document that I know we did not get to discuss tonight. So I wonder if there's, maybe like a couple different approaches, like if people feel like they're comfortable thinking like short, medium, long, or like I think I would be more comfortable sort of taking that issues document and like responding to it or redlining it, or like there's some things that I think are missing. So I don't know if folks would be open to that, or you could do both. But I think it would be really good to keep that issues document up for discussion next time as well. And then I don't want to put extra work on you, Heather, but I wonder if we're sending it by May 21st, like maybe you're thinking of doing this anyway, like trying to bucket or like theme what we've, rather than just like, here's what Sarah submitted, here's what Frank submitted, like try to, I don't know, like group them so that we have like different topics of discussion. Otherwise, I feel like it could be all over the place.
Yeah, my hope is that everybody does organize it in short, medium, and long term. And then I could do subcategories based on that.
I'll try. I mean, what do we mean by short term? Like a year, 2 years?
I think there's an interpretation of that, frankly. Not to throw another wrench into it, but I think maybe that could be a request. If there is some definition that each member applies to.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. Put a time. Yeah.
Let's see here. And Sarah, to your point around the document, I do think we should put that back on the agenda. There is some important information in there that we should just be conscious of as we talk about this. And I know that came up previously too.
Adam, if I could just second's probably the wrong word, but while you all are thinking about the activities and what you want to do, to Sarah's point, the important of that document is going to be the framework in allowing us to do them. And we have to have that whole stream of work going. That's like really important work if you want to see progress. So
I'll say like, that's where my brain has been with this. Like, I just keep thinking like, what is the path forward? And like, what are the obstacles in our way? And like, how do we solve those obstacles rather than just like, I want to see a picnic table on the site.
That's what gets the obstacles out of the way is that track. Yeah.
Yep. So I think this is actually, frankly, these are good ideas to correlate into one meeting. And if we focus our next agenda, our next meeting on identifying those obstacles and then talking about visioning, those actually seem very linked. Doesn't mean that we're going to then arrive at a conclusion right at the end of that meeting, but certainly they are connected.
And I'll see what I can do about tying the two documents together, the two documents being that issues document and then what I compile from what you send me. I'll see if it can fit right. But I think that's a great point because it is about trying to like figure out the logistics basically of how we make things happen.
Definitely. And we have the one document already because we've had it for this meeting. I do want to recognize Alan, and then I did want to ask about how we wanted to fit subcommittees into that next agenda. But Alan, go ahead.
Well, I guess I just want to underscore that this Center of the City Issues exploration that Tom did, I think that should really be our kickoff point, looking at all that. And maybe that's the first part of the meeting, and then we share what our long, short, and medium range views are. But I think those really look at the short range. How do we get this thing in motion on the various fronts, and how are we working together? So I don't want us to lose track of the work that went into that, and the problems that it identifies. Unless we deal with them, we won't get to the next stage.
I would agree with that thinking totally. We have had this discussion on the creation of subcommittees. It seems like, frankly, that is a good ending of next week's meeting, is to get, if we talk about the sort of things that we have to deal with in the present document, we talk about the visioning that we have individually, and then we can identify where we need to go on the committees. Does that seems logical to me, in terms of, it seems like a lot for one meeting, but it does seem logical. So maybe we can try and shoot for doing that next month. That sounds like a pretty good agenda to me.
Yeah, I agree.
Heather, could we ask you in the meantime as well to investigate what we need to do to actually physically get together, and obviously be prudent around safety and also public notice? Jeff, you had your unmute there for a second. Go ahead.
No, I just said I agree with you. I thought you were right.
Okay. Frank.
I sense we're about to move to other public comment, but I just wanted to come back to, acknowledging Erica and what she's prepared to do. In my mind, that is a really important step that's going to facilitate all of what we're going to bring forward at the next meeting and meetings beyond. That's going to give us the ability to move beyond conversation to actual planning. And my hat's off to Erica for stepping forward in such a important way. Thank you.
Definitely. In that case, then, why don't we move on to public comment and see if there are any folks that would like to say anything?
We do have somebody with their hand raised that's on the phone, so I'm going to unmute you or allow you to talk. The person whose phone number ends with 644. All right. All right, you should be able to talk.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Thank you. My name is Kathy Boris, and I'm speaking only for myself. And thank you for allowing me to speak. And I want to talk about the short term, like this summer, when it will probably be very hot and people will need some place to go, especially downtown, among all the cement. And there's a very nice area by Carytown and the Farmers Market, and it has tables and chairs and string lights above, and it's very popular, and it's very attractive, and it's very simple. And I wonder if that area could be used as a model for funding. I wonder who's funding those tables and chairs and string lights, and who's funding the cleanup of that little area, and who handles misbehavior if it goes on, all those little things. But I wonder if we could use that very nice area near Carytown and the Farmers Market as a model for setting up something very simple for the center of the city, so that the public can start to enjoy the center of the city just as soon as possible. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you for your suggestion as well. Heather, do we have any other folks?
We do. All right, so the person with the phone number 345, you should be able to talk now.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Kitty Kahn, and I'm kind of disappointed that you skipped over item 10 because those short-term things are so important right now, and I can see where long-term planning is important, but we just have to get those cars off the parking lot, and it seems like there's been a lot of talk around and around and around, and I know how bureaucracy works, but just get those cars off the lot. And as the previous caller said, how expensive can it be to string up lights, put some, just like the farmer's market, just like she said, let's just do that. And also, I want to thank Erica very much as well for agreeing to bring some funding issues before City Council. I had one question though. When Erica was talking about that, she mentioned the expenses of the construction on the Y lot somehow related to the funding for the center of the city, but I thought the Y lot was being funded by Proposal C, and I don't think that has anything to do with monies for the center of the city. So I'm kind of confused. So maybe Erica could send me an email and explain that. And also, I sent the resolution to Erica and Alice and Adam that was passed by the City Council in December of 2019, and I'm hoping that was shared with everybody. I'm looking, did you guys get that? Yes? No? I'm looking at my screen. I can't see any. So I'm hoping that was shared with everybody, because that resolution that was passed in December of 2019 by City Council talks about funding. And in fact, there's one resolve clause that says that the parking revenue from the surface lot back to a date in 2018, a certain amount per diem, 6 days a week, would be used for funding the commons. And I was hoping tonight to hear some discussion about that resolution, because that would add up to quite a bit of money, the revenue from the parking. So anyway, and then I had one more thing to say. You were talking about trying to decide who could take some really good minutes so it would be easy to find things. And I'm a little confused about Heather's role. I think you're part of the staff, is that correct? So why can't Heather take the minutes? Why can't Heather be the one to take detailed minutes? That just seems logical to me, but maybe I'm not understanding her role correctly. I think that's all I had to say. Get those cars off the lot. Thanks to Erica, because we really need the City Council to keep their promise, as was stated in the resolution that was passed by City Council in December of 2019. And if you haven't all read that resolution, I really hope you have. I sent it to 3 people and asked that it be shared with the whole council on the commons. So, okay, that's all I have to say. Thank you. Get the cars off the lot. Okay, bye.
Thank you, Kitty. And just for any callers, if you could send documentation to Heather per the Open Meetings Act, she can distribute it amongst all members. And I think that is an important point to make, given your request, Kitty. Heather, are there other folks?
There are. So Robert Black, you are up next. Allowing you to talk.
Thank you, Heather. And thank you all. I just want to congratulate you. And in 2 meetings, you have made major accomplishments. I watched in my work in facilitating groups, I watched your first meeting, and this one is qualitatively and quantitatively different. And you guys are really on your way to doing something here. More will be revealed, right? And I just want to underscore a couple things real quickly. I think Rita said something about interest, action, momentum. I turn them around into the word aim, action, interest, and momentum. And I really applaud Tom Crawford for setting this structure for you, because it's really important that you understand, even though Alan's comments about people are the grassroots of this, the commons is all about the people kind of leading things, which is important. But turn the model on its head, put the people on the top, and put the city underneath as the foundation of the structure for those people. And you heard it tonight. You heard it very well. I've worked a lot with financial officers and money, and you heard the foundational framework that you need to adhere to for the city. The council doesn't typically have a checkbook. The city has the checkbook. And there's other, this idea of steward of the public resources is a critical foundational piece to understand. So you can write that down and stand on it. Next up is the city council, which has authorized you as the Council of the Commons to be the protectors of the common good. And so you are the decision-making group. Each one of you is the salient and strong member that will speak that voice. No one else will or can make that decision. The initiating committee can't do it. The DDA can't do it for you. The library, Green Conservancy can't do it for you. You are it. And I'm watching you start to gel as a group. I love the idea that you have a structure for next meeting, that you work on issues first, then you do 3 separate things: short-term, medium-term, long-term. And I advise not to have Heather collate those things or sort them in any way, that you need to sort them together. And you need to see everybody speaking as it was written. And then there's a process in facilitation called commonalities and differences, where you will see what works and what doesn't. And you will know what is the short-term horizon. You will decide very easily next time what that is. Is it December 31st, calendar year 2021? What's medium term? You will know that, and you'll decide those things really, really quickly and easily. There's a million other things I could get into, but the last thing I wanted to say, you were always talking about getting to a plan or having a plan so that we can design something. It's like, no, it's too soon for that. It's like biodynamic gardening. You don't grow the flowers that Rita has without tending to the soil first. You guys are making the soil of this thing. And so this idea of your homework to go back and review what was done before under you, look on page 26 of the Center of the City Task Force, and you'll find Urban Spaces Preferences Survey that talks about fountain, sculpture, grassy, paved, walking, sitting areas. Look on page 27 of the Activities Preferences Survey, and you will find sit with friends, visit library, listen to live music, public restroom. You got a lot of work that's already done. And then if you want to talk about physical structure, which I don't think you should until you talk to the partners in a block meeting, you can look on pages 23 and 24 where there's a description of the Civic Commons building. But I think that's even too premature for that until you have this larger meeting. And just to underscore what Frank was saying, you create a vision for this. This is what Adam's term was too, create a vision. Create a vision for this, and the money will start to line up and the people will come in there. So the last thing I want to end with is three points. Make tangible small steps. Earth Day shows progress. You can build public awareness. The initiating committee can help do that for you. And I think you should put a report to council to show the things that you have done, to say we are doing it. Second one is get that block partners meeting up this summer. And 3, have a working session amongst yourselves to really get this grounded and in your own framework, because you are it and you're doing it. And I really applaud you. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Heather, any other folks?
There is. So the person with a phone number ending in 464, I'm going to allow you to talk.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you. Starting to feel like a groupie. I spoke earlier. This is Linda Brower. I want to thank Chair Zemke and Tom Crawford and Heather Seifert for their answers to my questions regarding the balance of the current fiscal year budget for staff and CTN, which they provided both via email and tonight. Thank you so much. And I'm happy to know that there will now be a portion of an FTE to support the Council of the Commons, and that charges from CTN will be none or minimal. That's good news. I also very much appreciate Councilmember Briggs's commitment to bring a budget amendment to Council to allocate a very modest amount to the Council of the Commons this year. Thank you, Councilmember Briggs. I very much support Mr. Crawford's framework that he presented a couple meetings ago of short, medium, and long-term planning. That's a very helpful planning framework. I understand that additional community engagement sessions that you guys have talked about in design work can be expensive, and more than a modest amount will be needed for that. I would hope that eventually the DDA will commit to support this effort by contributing funding for the more expensive mid and long-term goals. I so much appreciate the member, I didn't catch his name, I think it was, well, I didn't catch his name, Jeff maybe, who suggested that you all send your ideas for short, mid, and long-term goals to Heather to compile and send to you before the next meeting to make your discussion more productive. It was a very, very efficient suggestion. Now, I really want to address the short-term goals. I think it's wonderful you're thinking about mid and long-term, but it's May, you know, and your next meeting is early June. In my opinion, and I don't think I'm alone in this, the shortest term goal is what you need to focus on now. And the shortest term goal should be having something happen this summer, like basic furnishings and whatever is needed, as Tom Crawford cautioned, to support that in terms of maintenance and security, and some string lights to make it welcoming in the evening. And I hope that if Councilmember Briggs's budget amendment is passed at council, that money can be used to implement some of those short-term goals this summer. And I urge Mr. Crawford to work with the DDA to remove cars from the surface lots at least on weekends. I believe the previous city administrator had a plan for that, and that could be followed. It's been about 2 years since the charter amendment has passed. Last summer can be given a pass, since we were still learning how to function in a pandemic. But the space needs to be made welcoming, and some activity has to happen this summer, or this project is going to lose all credibility. If you all brainstorm short-term goals over the next couple of weeks and send them to Heather, I hope at your next meeting in early June, you can pass a resolution, come to a consensus on some short-term goals, and pass a resolution on what can be done immediately. And hopefully by then, because the council is going to vote on the final budget at their second meeting in May, by your early June meeting, if you pass a resolution on short-term goals, the money will be there, modest amount, and use that to make something happen in June. I really thank each and every one of you for your commitment and enthusiasm for the Commons. My only caution is you need to work on implementing some short-term goals and getting something happening this summer. And after you do that next month, you have the whole rest of the year to work on midterm and longer-term goals. Thank you so much for all of your commitments to this. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else, Heather?
Yes. The person with the phone number 345 raised their hand. And I think that is Kitty. Did you want to speak again?
Hi, this is Kitty Khan again. Can you hear me?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. I cannot find any contact information for Heather. I would like to send in fact, the Council of the Commons doesn't have, I couldn't find anything on the city website for Council of the Commons with any contact information for the group at all. And when I sent that email to Adam and Erica and Alice, Erica wrote back to me and said, thank you, but nobody told me that I had to send things to Heather in order for them to distribute it to the meeting. I don't really understand how that would be a violation of the Open Meetings Act if I sent an email to 3 members and asked them to distribute it. I don't get that. But anyway, I would gladly send to Heather what I sent to those 3 members, but I don't know where to find Heather's contact information. So my email is kkan, KKAHN, @comcast.net. And I would appreciate it if Heather could please send me an email with her contact, and so then I can reply and send that letter with the resolution and what I wanted distributed to the whole council. Sorry if I'm a little frustrated, but it's hard when there's no contact information listed anywhere. And that should be a no-brainer. Any commission from the city should have contact information so that residents could contact you. Okay. Sorry, I'm cranky. Sorry.
No, that's okay. No, my information should be up there. Actually, I thank you for pointing that out. I actually thought it was up there. So I'll get that up there tomorrow, but I have your information for the time being.
Well, actually, there is, if you go to the Ann Arbor city website and you put in Council of the Commons, it'll show up Council of the Commons. You click on that and there's a whole thing there with the members of the Council of the Commons. Your information, Heather, is there as far as I'm concerned.
You know, I'm looking at it right now, and I think maybe in the last update of the web page, maybe somehow my information got removed because I'm not seeing it up there right now. So I think it was an error that it was removed. So we'll get it back up there.
Any other commenters?
No, I'm not seeing anybody else with their hands raised. I think I accidentally lowered a hand. So if you did have something to say, I don't know if it was somebody that had already spoken, but please do raise your hand if you do have anything else to say. Tom has something to say. I'm not seeing anybody else from the audience.
It looks like Ms. Khan has exited the meeting, but I just want you all to know that she's not subject to the Open Meetings Act. The residents don't have to send everything through Heather. They can all email you. That would be quite a burden for Heather to be in the middle of all of your emails. She is there. You need to send to her, but residents are free to write you.
All right. Well, I think since, is there another hand raised now, Heather?
Oh, there is. Yes,
Okay.
number 464. The number ending with 464.
Oh, thank you. This is Linda again, and I appreciate you letting me speak again. And the reason I wanted to speak again is because the previous speaker talked about issues in communicating with you. I was able to find, well, I know Councilmember Briggs's email, and I was able to find Tom's and Heather's. So I was able to communicate via email. But I want to reiterate my suggestion. Tom, thank you, Mr. Crawford, for letting us know that, you know, we as individual citizens are free to communicate directly with anybody on the Council of the Commons. That's important that we all realize that. We don't have to go through Heather, although I think it's a good idea to copy her so she knows what's going on. But to facilitate our communicating with the members of the Council of the Commons, it would be really great if you guys could set up a group email address like PAC and Planning Commission. All the commissions have a group email, which makes it very, very easy for us ordinary citizens to communicate with all of you. So I know it's easy to do. It's just probably something, you know, you didn't think of. So I really hope that you'll do that to make it easier for the public to communicate with you. Thank you.
Well, that's just something that I need to set up through IT. And just so everybody's aware, that email, anything that goes through that email would actually come to me. And then I would print out or make PDFs of the communication that comes through that email and put it in the packet for the meeting. So that's when you'd be seeing those emails coming through.
All right. Any other public comment then?
I think that's it. The person with the number 464 has their hands raised, but I think you just spoke. Did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
Heather, that was me, and I spoke again. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Then I think that's it for members of the public.
Okay, very good. With that, then, can I get a motion for adjournment?
So move.
All right, second?
So second.
All right, sounds good. All in favor, say aye.
Yay.
Aye. We're getting close to the 9:30 or the 9 o'clock mark.
Thanks, everyone.
Good job.
Yeah, thank you. Good work tonight.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.